Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Hans Korteweg. I'm the Executive Director at COGEN World Coalition. So a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us. We've had quite a few people registered. Not everyone is online yet, but nevertheless, I suggest we get started. We have only an hour. Just some few housekeeping rules to take into account. We are recording this session, so be aware of that. And we will make the recording available to everyone after the webinar, probably by tomorrow morning. So if you or a colleague could not make it, or you'd like to share, it will be available via the CWC website, as well as a follow-up email to your registration, and you should get the link there as well. And we'll make the slides of the report available. So today, of course, it's the launch of the fourth Global Cogeneration Report. We're very excited to share the latest statistics that we were able to obtain from the International Energy Agency, which was then analyzed and reviewed by Challoch Energy, our partner. So we're very thankful for that. But before getting into the content and before I welcome Simon to present the results, I'd like to turn over to Tom Smith, the president of COGEN World Coalition, to say a few introductory remarks. And as usual, you can use the Q&A function if you have any questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So Tom is traveling and won't be able to show any video, but he is prepared to say a few words now. So Tom, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Hans. Well, maybe not sharing my video is a good thing. But I want to thank everybody for attending. I know it's an amazing time for the energy industry. As those of you who know me, I've been around the industry quite some time. Actually started in it in 1980, and I've never seen a time ever in the industry where there's more interest. Every time you turn on a TV, you're hearing things about power and the need for power, all over the world. So again, a very exciting time to be in the CHP industry. I want to thank Hans and Simon for all the work that they're doing putting this together. As you know, when you're doing a global report, getting information from all the different countries on what's happening in their energy markets and, how much CHP is being looked at is a hard task. So we do the best we can with the data we have to put the report together. The other thing that I can just sort of tell you from the North American market, I am also the president of the Combined Heat and Power Alliance, which is an organization in the United States. We've never seen a more active time in the marketplace since we started that organization. We're seeing a lot of interest, not just in electric power, but thermal energy. We've got two major trends going on in the industry. We've got the data center market that everybody is very, very aware of. And I think the data centers that are going in now are more focused on speed to market than they have been on efficiency. But over time, we're seeing a lot of interest in combined heat and power because, as most of you know, about 50% of the energy that's used in a typical data center is used for cooling. And by using combined heat and power with absorption chilling, we can double the efficiency of the power that's getting generated. In a lot of cases, cut the emissions in half. So, a very, very big interest for the data center community. And then along with the growth in the data center world, you're seeing a lot of industrial growth, which is bringing back the traditional CHP markets like we've seen in, commercial and industrial applications. So it's a tremendously exciting time. The industry has been around, as most of you know, for, over 140 years since Thomas Edison put the first plant in. And I think we're going to be seeing a very interesting next 140 years. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Hans and Simon as they go through the report. And thanks again, everybody, for attending. One other quick thing that I always do. So I'm sort of a salesman at heart, but the real backbone of the CWC and all the other the associations that are involved in combined heat and power is membership. And if any of you would like to join, we'd sure love to have you. It's a great cause. And, Hans can, if you can contact Hans, we can get you that information. So again, thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the welcome and introductory remarks, and thank you for the mentioning CWC membership. You're more than welcome to contact me or go via the CWC website. Turning back to the fourth global market report, so I'm very pleased to welcome back Simon Minette. He's the managing director of Challoch Energy, and once again he's had an opportunity to review and analyze the IEA data and prepare this report for us. So Simon, we're looking forward to the report. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Tom. I'll just bear with me 1 second while I try to share my screen. Can you see that now? Hans, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, jolly good. Okay, so this is, as it's been
Simon,
said,
I don't know, maybe is there a present view that may make it look a little bigger? I don't know.
Do that. Just bear with me a second.
I don't know, Hans, if you see that on your...
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
Tom?
better. Yep, thank you.
That's great, thanks.
That's brilliant. It's the challenge of running off one screen rather than more than one. So as has been said, this is the fourth time we've done this Global CHP Market Overview. And it's a time series effectively. So as we add additional years, we drop the years that are older. So it's basically a 10-year look at the market. So what I'll do is I'll present this overview, and then I'm pleased. Feel free to add questions into the chat, and we'll try and answer those as when we come to the end of the presentation. Okay, so the report, which is this slide deck, we go through just a little bit of an overview of where we got the data from. Then we give an overview of the world market, and then we look at different regions, so Europe, the Americas, Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand. And we finish up in this report with looking at some current and future trends and some prospects for each continent. So in terms of the methodology, it's a desk-based process. So we're not going out and getting the data ourselves. We're using sources which are there, which is priorities given to the IEA, who collects data. But we also use Eurostat for Europe, and there's a comparison in the European data for that. As I said, the analysis runs from period 2013 to 2023. 2023 is the last year where we get effectively a full data set, or a fuller data set, should I say. We do have some 2024 data, but it's not complete. So we haven't included that here. And to be fair to the authorities that collect the data from the various countries, it takes a couple of years to come through, to be honest, and to verify and things like that. So normally the statistics are 2 years out of date. So that's one reason why we put a little bit of effort into thinking about what the current status is and where the trends are likely to go. Okay, what we've done is we've looked at the fuel mix, we've looked at CHP electricity and heat generation. Heat is not always available in all markets. Some countries don't report it. We look at the electricity share of CHP electricity share of total electricity generation, and the report sort of looks at the region as a whole and then picks the 2 or 3 biggest markets in those regions. I think, Hans, if people wanted it, we could probably produce a few slides on particular countries if there's a demand, but not all countries we have. So the African continent, the data is much more patchy than Europe or North America. Okay, so looking at the world as a whole, so this is CHP plants in 2023. There's 4.9 petawatt hours of electricity generation, so 4.5 thousand terawatt hours produced from CHP plants. What we see in the graph on the right side of this is a modest increase in total electricity generated from CHP from just under 4,000 terawatt hours to just over 4,000 terawatt hours in this 10-year period. We see a marked increase in the amount of heat being supplied from CHP plants. But we also see that the share of CHP electricity generation in the total electricity market has reduced dramatically from over 16% to under 15%. And that is partly due to the rapid rise in renewable energies in some markets and the electrification of society. So more electrical vehicles, more electric heating systems, etc., drives electricity demand, and the CHP share of that doesn't keep pace with the total market. Oops, I think I jumped a slide. If we look at the fuel mix globally, the lion's share of the market is from coal and coal products, which is about 63% of the total market is from those fuels. Biofuels is a small market with about 6% of the total fuel. Natural gas forms about a third, so 30%. And then there's little bits and pieces from geothermal, some waste heat that goes into organic Rankine cycles with further heat afterwards, and oil and peat, and then others. There's a little bit of nuclear in some markets as well, as a heat supply or a power and heat supply. Coal here is dominated by the Asian market, so you'll see that when we come later in the slide deck, that China is important in this process, and that sort of dictates some of the reasons why coal is such a dominant share. But what we do see over time is that the amount of coal is gradually decreasing as alternative fuels to coal are being deployed. Future trends in the market, we still expect to see a shift towards renewables, so increasing use of biofuels, solar and wind in those markets. And clearly solar and wind is difficult for CHP, of course, but solar thermal into CHP plants is possible. So we expect to see a rise in the renewables. How fast that shift will be, it's a little bit difficult to predict, especially at the moment where geopolitics is a little bit more unstable than perhaps it was last year when I was speaking on this about 16, 17 months ago. And then we have alternative decarbonized fuels, so that could be e-fuels, it could be hydrogen and things like that, which are all being talked about, but they're not showing yet in the statistics. Okay, region by region now. I'm going to show two sets of data for Europe. So this is the EU 27, as it's called, which is the membership of the European Union. It doesn't include the UK any longer because they left a few years ago, but it's all the current members of the European Union. This is the IEA data, and I'll do a comparison with the IEA and the Eurostat data, and I'll comment on them in the different methodologies at that point. So what you can see from the IEA data is that CHP electricity has declined from around 600 terawatt hours to 550 or so terawatt hours in 2023. The amount of heat has also declined in this market, and the share of electricity has declined. Those trends are driven by what's called the energy transition in Europe, as we move to more decarbonized approaches to energy and the replacement of thermal heat supply, so from boilers or CHP plants towards electrified heat supply. Those trends are ongoing, and I suppose Europe almost is a way of the first mover on this. Whether other regions follow is a good question, but Europe has been on this trajectory for the last 20 years, and it's only the last 5 or 6 years we started to actually see some real impacts of that trend. In terms of fuels used, natural gas is the dominant fuel in Europe, with about 46% of the total fuel going into CHP plants. Biomass is a quarter, 23%, and the other quarter is a mixture of coal, geothermal, and oil, and a little bit of nuclear, but not very much. So what we've seen is a shift from the solid fuels towards the more gaseous fuels, and an increase in the amount of biofuels and waste that goes into this system. So if I just scroll back for one moment and take them, so the IEA says that there is 600 terawatt hours of electricity from CHP plants, and in the Eurostat data, we see just under 400 in 2013, that was. The difference in the methodologies is that the IEA collects data on a more raw basis, so they don't look at whether the electricity generated from a CHP plant is actually used at the same, or is produced at the same time as the heat. So some CHP plants can produce power only at some point, or an element of the plant is a power only element, and the heat, there's no associated heat recovery at that point. So the IEA takes less account of that, doesn't remove it. The Eurostat data over the last 30 years has spent a lot of time trying to clean that data up a bit and look at the real CHP element of a power plant, rather than the apparent CHP element or apparent CHP. And so that accounts for why there's a difference between the two data sets. So you see the same sort of trends, Eurostat, as you do for the IEA, in that the amount of CHP electricity produced by CHP plants has fallen by about 15–16%. That the amount of heat produced by CHP plants has also fallen. Eurostat hasn't managed yet to produce the heat data for 2023, so we've only got the trend to 2022 for heat. And you see the share of total electricity has declined, but not as dramatically as in the global marketplace. If we look at the countries' share of CHP, the CHP market in Europe is dominated by the largest European country, which is Germany, with about 80 terawatt hours of electricity. And then there's a mixture of countries. Most of these countries are either industrialized countries. So, for example, in Spain, almost all the CHP is in the industrial sector, whereas in countries like Finland and Sweden and Poland and Germany, of course, a lot of that CHP electricity is also associated with district heating, where there is a substantial heating need due to the climate. And Germany has a mixture of both district heating and a lot of industrial CHP as well. Again, on the right side of this, you can see the fuel split, and the amount of fuel used in CHP plants, according to the Eurostat data sets, is broadly similar to the IEA. So it's about half of the fuel is natural gas, about a quarter is renewables and waste, and then the other quarter comes from solid fuels, other fuels, and oils. So it's those two sort of sets of statistics are broadly similar. Okay, just to finalize on the comparison between the two data sets, and it's important to remember for the rest of the world, most of that data has come from the IEA. So that methodology that the IEA uses is consistent across all those countries, assuming the data supplied is of the same quality, which in some countries may not be, but it's the same methodology that's being used. So the Eurostat way of looking at things tends to produce a lower amount of CHP electricity than the IEA set. So that needs to be borne in mind as we look at the rest of the world's data. A few specific countries. So as you saw earlier, Germany is the dominant country for CHP capacity. It's also the dominant country for CHP energy supply. And Germany is about 55% of the fuel in Germany is natural gas. Just over 30% is biofuels, and a much smaller proportion than the European totals comes from coal and oil. And those two sectors are shrinking. So we'll see the biofuel and waste element grow, and the other fuels shrink in Germany. That's our expectation over the next few years. What you can see in terms of total electricity generation, a bit less for heat, and the share of CHP in total electricity is Germany has sort of bucked the trend of the rest of Europe in that CHP shares has grown a little bit over the last 10 years. The amount of electricity has moved up and down a bit, but it's broadly stable at about 100 terawatt hours. Just over, and the heat has declined a little bit with some of the district heating schemes moving from CHP plants to heat pumps and other technologies. Same picture for Italy. We're not so sure about the heat data here. There seems to have been a revision of the methodology for counting for heat in Italy back in between 2018 and 2019. The statistics just you wouldn't expect to see that trend like that so dramatically in one year. So the methodology changed in 2018, 2019, where they excluded probably the boiler heat from CHP that's used in association with CHP plants. But electricity has remained broadly stable, and the share of electricity is also broadly the same over the last 10-year period. The Netherlands was the sort of back in the year 2000. The Netherlands was the sort of one of the leading countries for CHP, with more than 40% of the country's electricity coming from CHP plants. We've seen a decline in that, and you can see the decline continues in this last 10-year period from a high of about 50% of, and this is IEA data, so it's about 50% down to around 30%. You see the same trends in Eurostat, by the way. That decline is continuing. The amount of electricity has declined. The amount of heat has also declined, and that there are a number of CHP plants that have been taken out of service in this period. As they got older, they haven't been replaced by new plant. They've just been closed down and replaced by alternatives. In the Netherlands, the fuel split is predominantly natural gas, and so 65% natural gas, 21% for renewable fuels, and the balance coming from other fuels, coal and oil products. Turning to Poland, so Poland's a country with a history of a very dominant coal market. Last 30 years, coal has before that, coal dominated that process. We've seen an increase in the amount of natural gas in Poland over the last 10, 15 years, but it's still minor compared to the coal usage. And we see a relatively stable market for both heat and power in that country over that 10-year period, and relatively stable share of CHP electricity as well. That trend is, I suspect, set to continue, but a lot of the new plants we see being discussed in the marketplace are gas-fired plants as opposed to coal-fired plants. So can expect the share between at least natural gas and coal to shift as we move forward in the next couple of years. Looking at a couple of European countries are on the border of the EU. So I picked Ukraine. It's a bit topical today. And you can see here that the amount of electricity produced by CHP plants is relatively low. So a lot of the CHP plants in Ukraine were heavily heat-led. A lot of steam turbines in that market originally. And what you can see is that the share of CHP electricity has grown quite dramatically from around 8% to between 13 and 14% today. That's partly due to the political processes that are ongoing in Ukraine at the moment, where some of the central power plants have been disabled by the war. But CHP is an important technology for that country as it rebuilds itself in the future. Natural gas is the predominant fuel in Ukraine. It's almost 100% of the fuel is from natural gas. Though you could expect some increase in things like nuclear when the nuclear fleet starts to get rebuilt. Finally, from the European side, a slide on the United Kingdom. This is IEA data, and I really question the graph. When I look at the total electricity produced by CHP plants, I think this overestimates it. Unfortunately, in the old days, the UK produced its own statistics, which are not as good any longer and out of date. And the UK used to be part of Eurostat and is no longer there, so we can't verify this. But my own market intelligence, if you like, would suggest that the amount of CHP in the UK has declined rather than grown in this 10-year period. So we put a health warning on this one. The fuel mix is about right though. So about 3/4 of the fuel in the UK CHP fleet is natural gas, and 17 or so percent is from biofuels and waste. A large proportion of that is actually the waste sector. Okay, I now switch to the Americas. So this is both North and South America and Central America. So the CHP in America is an important technology. 420 terawatt hours of power is produced from CHP plants in 2023. Large proportion of that power is fueled by natural gas with a reasonably high share of biofuels. You'll see as we look at different countries that shifts around depending on the country. For example, Brazil has a high share of because of its natural resources. Total electricity is very stable. In fact, from CHP plants, just over 400 terawatt hours in 2013 and just about the same in 2023. The share has moved around a bit and is declined. And I would expect the decline to continue as data centers come onto the system, especially in the US, where the data center market is booming, and almost all that power is now is coming from non-CHP plants. It's not grid connected. A lot of it's not grid connected, but it's coming from prime power sites which are yet to be made into CHP, as Tom intimated at the beginning of the webinar. Looking at the US is a good chunk of the total market. So 422 terawatt hours in the Americas as a whole, and nearly 300 of that comes from the US. Not surprising, it's the largest economy with a very large industrial base. And but again, you can see that in terms of the electricity produced by CHP plants, it's been relatively stable, around about 300 terawatt hours for the last decade. The share has declined, and that downturn in 2022 and then the upturn in 2023, which you see on the Americas as a whole, is driven by what goes on in the US market. So maybe Tom has some insight on why we get the upkick, or the down kick and then the upkick in that those 2 years. Fuel mix for the US, 80% of fuel going into CHP plants is natural gas. A smaller proportion than we've seen so far from biofuels and waste, only about 10%. And then the balance, the other 10% comes from coal and others and oil products. Turning now to Canada. Canada's a relatively small market especially compared to the US. And we've seen a steady rise in the amount of CHP since 2017. It's been on the rise, and now makes up around about 3% or so of electricity production. So it's very small compared to the shares we've seen in other markets. CHP is still an underutilized technology within Canada. Almost all the fuels are natural gas. It's 97%, and the amount of heat coming from these schemes is in and around 20 terawatt hours, so a little bit above the power produced. Okay, by contrast, this is Brazil. It's a much bigger market than Canada, but still quite a small market compared to the US. It's seen a rise in the share of CHP in the total electricity market, and it's now stabilized. The last 3 or 4 years, it's been fairly stable. We've only got the electricity from this. There's no statistics on heat from Brazil, unfortunately. So you can see that it's about 85 terawatt hours of electricity comes from CHP plants. And that's grown from 62 in 10 years ago. And the vast majority of the fuel going into CHP plants in Brazil is biofuels, with a 22% share from natural gas and 65% from biofuels, and the balance from coal and oil. So biofuels is a very important market there. So it's sugarcane and it's forest products and other crops, or crop residue, should I say. Okay, turning now to the Asian market. So this is Asia as a whole. So that covers the South Asian market, the Southeast Asian market, China, Japan, and the stands. So very large market, 2,700 terawatt hours of power generation. So what's that? That's about 5 times bigger than the US or the Americas as a whole. So it's the largest market in the largest regional market in the world. It's also the largest continent, of course, and also it's the most populous place on the planet. We've seen an increase in CHP electricity generation from just under 2,000 terawatt hours to 2,700 terawatt hours in this decade. And we've seen a steady rise in the heat as well. But we've also seen a decline in the share of total electricity from CHP plants. It's currently sitting around 15.5 to 16%. But it's been stable. It's not completely stable, but the decline is not been so rapid since 2016 as it was before 2016. So we had a rapid electrification in Asia, especially in China in the period up to 2016, and since then it's been a little bit more steady, and CHP plants have kept pace with the rest of the market. Main fuel is coal and coal products. It's 90% of the total fuel mix in CHP plants, with a smaller share for natural gas and very little for biofuels. And there are clearly some countries in Asia where biofuels are very important, like Thailand and Malaysia. But as a continent as a whole, coal and coal products dominates the market. But we are starting to see a trend towards increased use of natural gas. So this is China. In some ways, Asia looks a bit like the Americas. It's dominated by one country. China is by far the largest market for CHP in Asia, with 2,400 terawatt hours out of a total of 2,700. So it's a very dominant player. And you can see in China, 96% of the total fuel mix is coal. So you've got the largest market dominated by coal, which sets the trend for the whole of the region. And you can see in the development that CHP electricity has grown gradually and steadily in the decade, as has the heat supply. But the overall share of CHP in the total electricity market has declined slightly. Looking now at India, I have some doubts about the data quality and some of this, in that the reporting is only on auto producers, and that includes solar and wind auto producers as well as CHP. So there's some data quality issues here. In terms of fuels, that's probably just for the CHP or at least the sort of smaller decentralized power plants. That's almost 100% biofuels, which is completely opposite to the electricity market in India, which has a large share of coal in it as well. Total market's about 30 terawatt hours. It has shown a growth in that period, but we have no heat data here at all. And I think data quality it's difficult to dig deeper into India with the data that is available to us. Okay, now turning to Africa. Africa's a very small market. Data quality is poor. We don't have any heat data for Africa. But what we see here is that the fuel mix in the CHP share is about half natural gas and not quite half biofuels. So it's that those two, the biofuels there's a lot of sugar and other agricultural residues used in the CHP market. Okay, I didn't put a slide in for South Africa, but again, South Africa is a dominant market player here for for the biofuel market. There's a lot, with sugar production, but there is other patches. But as I say, the data quality in Africa, in the African statistics, is not great. So it's not complete. So we're not getting a complete picture for Africa, and I would expect that if you could get more complete data, it would look a bit different. If you get North Africa, you'd start to see some gas-fired CHP in the Egyptian market and things like that, and you're not really seeing some of that in these statistics. Australia is again small market, similar sort of size to the Canadian market, and relatively small share of CHP in that market, around 5% of total electricity. Again, no heat data from this region or this country. But majority of the fuel, 80% of the total fuel is natural gas, with about 12% biofuels. But there's an awful lot of talk in this market about using hydrogen, and so hydrogen may start to displace some of the natural gas in the coming decade. But we're not seeing any of that yet in the statistics. New Zealand's even smaller. It's about 10%, I think, it's around about 10% of the Australian market. Much broader range of fuels, and here we do see some heat data, though thermodynamically this doesn't look right, that you're getting more electricity than you're getting heat from a CHP plant. So this is the total electricity generated from CHP plants. Some of that electricity is not the co-produced heat and power that the CHP cycle dictates. Total share of electricity in the New Zealand market has declined from just over 6% to down to about 4% or so in 2023. The heat market has been broadly stable, and the electricity market, total electricity produced from CHP plants has declined slightly. A bigger range of fuels in New Zealand, so a third natural gas, effectively a third biofuels, and a third coal in those CHP plants is used. Okay, just a few points on the current situation and forecasts. Looking at the market as a whole, current situation is as we've reported before, Asia Pacific market is the largest market globally, with China and India, especially China, dominating that market. Europe is a mature market. North America was a mature market, and with the rise of data centers and potentially CHP going into data centers, might have another day, another period where there's significant growth in CHP in the US. Still dominated by natural gas as a fuel in most countries, though, and clearly China is a large amount of coal. But there's strong policy pressure in some regions for decarbonisation, especially in Europe, where that goes ahead. US is a bit different these days. Steam turbines, gas turbines, and gas engines are the most widely used technologies. Steam turbines for the solid fuels, coal, biomass. Gas turbines, principally for the gaseous fuels. If we look towards the forecast, then I would expect to see Africa grow, but I haven't put any comments in that because we don't see any evidence for that. But with the changes in that continent's demographics, I'd expect to see the growth of that market grow as more electrification, more energy is needed for development. Expect to see the market still dominated by Asia, possibly with increase in India. And as I've already intimated, I expect to see the North American market kick up with the data center processes ongoing. If we look at technology, and the traditional technologies of steam turbines, gas engines, and gas turbines will remain. At the moment, there's the lead times on all of those technologies is going out from 15 to 18 months to 3 years or more, and that's driven by the development of prime power for data centers as much as anything else. And so the equipment manufacturers have tight capacities in their factories, and we see an awful lot of talk about small modular reactors, so smaller nuclear plants coming in, whether they'll be industrial or they'll be on district heating schemes or they'll be on data centers. I think the jury's still out on that, but we see the growth in that, and they would lend themselves more easily to CHP applications than the traditional larger um, uh, nuclear plants that exist around the world at the moment. In terms of fuel, we see a gradual shift from coal to natural gas, and then from natural gas to renewables. Speed of change different in different markets. Lots of pressure in Europe to decarbonize, much less pressure in North America to decarbonize at the moment. And in Asia, it's more a question of power, though China is also the world's largest renewable market, so it sort of dominates on many fronts. Okay, this is my final slide. So just a quick run around the regions, if you like. Europe has a well-established CHP market. It's been there for the last 30, 40 years. It's stable but slightly declining. We see some hotspots out there in Europe. It's good, and the CHP market is promising in some of the Eastern European countries. And there's been some trends in places like Spain where the stalemate for CHP for many years seems to be looking like it might get unlocked. And so there's a pent-up potential in countries like Spain where there's been no investment for the last decade or more. Asia Pacific, we expect to see significant CHP growth, linked to rapidly, industrialization, urbanization, and just the high growth rates that you see in some of these countries. China and India will dominate that. They are the largest two countries, of course, in terms of populations. And we expect to see China especially transitioning away from coal towards other fuels over the next decade. North America, stable and expanding market. Both US and Canada, or at least US, has established CHP infrastructure, government incentives for that in the past. Natural gas is the dominant fuel. And as I've said a few times now, the role of cogen in data centers, especially in the US, is likely to drive growth in the CHP market. In South America, modest growth, still significant barriers in some countries to actually putting CHP in. Brazil is the largest market in that region, with a large industrial element down in the Sao Paulo area. So some modest growth for South America. Africa is a little bit more of a unknown quantity. It has a huge emerging potential. Whether that can be realized or not, I think it's still too early to really see the trends there, but we would expect to see some growth in that market. So overall, mature markets for many places, CHP has a good future in countries, in Asia, in North America, and potentially in some of the emerging Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is me done.
Thank you, Simon. As usual, excellent presentation and some interesting trends and opportunities for CHP growth in different pockets around the world. I think generally stable with the possibilities for growth depending on the right policy and incentive programs in place. So thank you for that, and just a reminder to everyone that we'll make this all available as of tomorrow on the CWC website, both the recording of the webinar, which is ongoing, obviously, and then of course the slides as well. And we look forward to continuing to provide you insight to the CHP market globally, and as you've seen in the past as well. We will continue to organize country-specific webinars. We are planning at least 2 or 3 this year in countries where there are some positive developments for CHP. So look out for that in terms of announcements for these specific webinars. And we'll also be looking at different applications as well as different technologies for CHP. And of course, we will continue to also look at the role of CHP when it comes to data centers, maybe looking more specifically at different technology options, especially on the cooling side and water use, as was already identified in our last webinar in December. We haven't received any questions through the Q&A function. Oh, someone has jumped in. This is a question for you, Simon. Do you observe any growth trends in CHP with cooling, so absorption chillers? Maybe I kind of answered that in my. But since you were also responsible for the COGEN World Coalition data center report, I'll let you jump in there, and Tom maybe as well.
Yeah, we see potential for the heat offtake from CHP plants going into absorption chilling, especially in the data centers, to at least provide the baseload cooling for data centers. So we'd expect to see that part of the market grow. In terms of hotter climates, then the use of the heat off power plants to drive cooling systems for small districts may also be there, and we start to see that need for cooling even in markets like Europe, where temperature rises, and summer's got to a point where it starts to get uncomfortable for the population. It still might be lower than other places, but it's uncomfortable for Europeans to live in plus 30 odd degrees heat for chunks of the time. So there is a great pressure for cooling there. But I think the bulk will be driven by the need in data centers.
Yeah, maybe I'll quickly add to that. Thanks, Simon. I think what we're seeing specifically to data centers, they've traditionally focused on having electric power from the grid as their prime power, and then obviously using centrifugal type chillers for the cooling. Because of the crazy demand for growth and their power needs, you're seeing a lot of data centers migrating to putting their own generation in. And when they're putting their own generation in at a site, obviously the heat is there. So taking that heat and using it for a byproduct that a data center needs and cooling is becoming a big interest because of lowering emissions and efficiency. So I think you're going to see a number of data centers starting to adopt that. And once that happens, it's going to grow. The chiller community, such as Thermax and Broad and others that have made the absorbers, are now developing their product to be, like air-cooled systems, so they're not going through as much water. So I do think that, we're seeing some early adopters in North America for projects, and I'm hoping that, we see a big growth with that. And as Simon mentioned, if the incentive dollars come through, our Treasury group here in the United States, that'll even accelerate the growth. So I'm cautiously optimistic that that's going to be a pretty substantial market in the future, here in North America and throughout the world.
Thank you, Tom. We've got a question from COGEN Brazil for you, Simon. I think you touched upon it a little bit at the beginning of your presentation. I don't know if you see the questions as well, or
I can see it. So this is a question around the reduction in the relative share of cogen is it coming from solar photovoltaic and wind sources? Yes, predominantly. I think the answer to that is yes. Wind and solar have had very strong market growth in many markets, and we do see that trend continuing. But yeah, there's also the need for power to be produced on a dispatchable basis, because wind and solar is clearly climate, daytime and climate dependent. So you need firming power in that process. So there's a role there for CHP. There's also, when you're looking at the industrial market, it's difficult to electrify some parts of industry as well. So CHP still will continue to have a role. What we do expect to see, especially in markets which are more focused on the decarbonisation agenda, is that those fuels may switch from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels over the next decade. So increasing the use of hydrogen in those markets, or biofuels, and possibly the increase in the role of SMR nuclear in that process as well. Hopefully that answers that question. And
thank you for that. The last one
question
is, well, it's linked to the methodologies, and you can see that especially when you compare the IEA data and the Eurostat data, and maybe I can touch upon that as well from my experience in Europe as well. The EU has a very strict definition for high efficiency CHP, so you have to have at least 10% primary energy savings. And that's why you see, at least in the statistics from Eurostat, to be much lower, because it only includes high efficiency CHP in this data. There is still quite a lot of CHP running in Europe beyond what was shown in the Eurostat data, but because of that strict definition in EU law, CHP has to have at least 10% primary energy savings, which is enshrined in the Energy Efficiency Directive. And that's why you have also a skew in the data. But globally speaking, I don't believe there is a universal efficiency requirements. I know.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Hans. I think in the US, the Treasury Department that's reviewing the extension of the investment tax credits right now is, I think, using the efficiencies that are referenced in this question, but I can get the specific information out to you to send out.
All right. Thank you, Tom, for that. I believe that's all the time we have, and that's all the questions we have. So thank you again to Simon Minette and Challoch Energy for pulling together this report, and we look forward to continue editions of the Global Market Report. And also a special thanks to Tom for taking the time to join us and supporting COGEN World Coalition, and also your insight into the markets, especially in North America, but also globally. So thank you to the two of them, and we look forward to continuing to provide you more and insightful information about CHP at a global level. So look out for our press release tomorrow, and we will also be circulating all the materials via email to all the registered participants. So thank you for your active participation, and we continue to look forward to further interactions with everyone around the world. So thank you again, and that's it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hans. Thanks, Simon. Bye.